Good. Admiral, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for all you do. The mission of the Coast Guard is absolutely essential to who we are and our ability to live our lives as we do. In your testimony, you note that the ability of the United States to lead in the Arctic hinges on physical presence in the region, so that we can defend our homeland and safeguard our own security interests. You note that this is really important for us, and we ought to stick to that this means that we need assured year-round access to the polar regions. The Coast Guard has also noted that it needs 6 polar security cutters, these PSCs, for their missions. Now, my understanding is that the Coast Guard and Navy's first contract award for a PSC anticipates construction beginning sometime next year, sometime in 2021, is that right? And then delivery of a vessel by 2024, meaning that we may not have vessels to fully replace our aging icebreakers for 5 years, give or take, possibly a little bit more. Is that right?
That's accurate, Senator.
Now, how does this timeline harm the Coast Guard's readiness and its ability to carry out its polar missions?
Well, this timeline is it's really, at this point, it's unavoidable. We've got cutters that are over 40 years old. Well, the oldest one, Polar Star, the one that we talk about the most, and it's an interesting urgency. A sense of urgency has been on the Coast Guard for several years now, and I am just thankful that as a result of the leadership here in this subcommittee and the support of the administration, we are moving forward with recapitalizing. There's no time. The longest journey starts with the first step, and we're on the step.
Federal law generally prohibits the use of foreign contractors, foreign shipyards, for the construction of Coast Guard vessels or major components of Coast Guard vessels. It's no secret that Finland has boasted, apparently with some ability to back it up, that they could build an icebreaker within 2 years, and they could do it for less than $300 million. Now, undoubtedly, we need, for the reasons that you've stated quite persuasively, we need to be able to compete with China and with Russia in this region in particular. In order to accelerate our acquisition based on our needs for the acquisition, do you think Congress ought to consider it in a limited manner, sort of revisiting the general prohibition on foreign shipbuilding? In other words, would or could granting some limited flexibility to our NATO partners and friendly Arctic nations to help, is that something that could help the Coast Guard acquire the flexibility that it needs to get these vessels up and running so that we can establish this presence that we need in the Arctic?
Senator, first of all, as I'm sure it's no surprise to you, we are huge fans and supporters of the American industrial base and the shipyards along the Gulf Coast and I know you are too. With that said, I think the bridging strategy that makes the most sense to the Coast Guard at this point is this potential to lease one of these icebreakers, because it would need to be it would have to be U.S. flagged to be able to have the authority that we use it for. So that, from the perspective we've done, is trying to bridge to close this gap that we found ourselves in. That makes more sense to me.
Okay, it makes more sense, but just to be clear, there would be no security threats associated with security issues that would attend if we were to lift this restriction such that we could acquire a vessel in a different way than current law allows. Are there any security issues that would preclude us from contracting with someone operating within a NATO power or within another friendly nation, a friendly Arctic nation perhaps, to help us meet our shipbuilding needs? Would that present any security threat?
certainly it depends on which one you're talking about. Not all created equal, but of the Arctic nations that I'm familiar with, that I've dealt with, security of the ones that are our allies would not be the first concern I would have.
They would not be the first concern that you would have, and would they be a concern at all? Is that a concern to have purchased that from, Finland, for example?
Is security a concern for? Not to my knowledge, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. See, my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee. And just one final question relates to what Senator Lee was asking about. He raises a really good point about this huge gap in capability for coverage of protecting American sovereignty. Isn't that one of the reasons the president put the memo out on the issue of, if you're not going to build, which creates some legal challenges, at least right now under current law, to lease? And that's what we're looking at doing right now, leasing potential medium icebreakers from Finland is one option, correct?
There's been several different vessels alluded to. Some of them are Finnish origin, sir.
But to lease, to close that gap and protect that, to at least bridge that gap until we can build our own.
That is the general strategy that we've been exploring as a result of the president's memo.
And do you think that makes sense?
I think to a degree it does, sir. If, the one thing I do want to state, these vessels, I've been around them, and various commercial icebreakers, if you will, and they're not too military design with regards to communications, with regards to damage control, with regards to compartmentalization. So if we get in some sort of accident because of the nature of the work that we do. So they're a different cat. We would have to do some work to them. It's not just take one off the shelf. If it was, we'd have probably done that a long time ago.
Right.
So there will be some work required to make these for their Coast Guard. But with that said, it is the Commandant's position and our position that we will certainly consider this and work to see what makes sense to bridge this gap.
Great. Sure. Yeah, certainly.
I just have to ask the question. So if I understand the point that's being made, and I think Senator Sullivan raises an excellent point. If in order to bridge the gap, perhaps we could lease something. If we could lease, for example, a vessel that's been built in Finland, that would suggest that our security needs are met by that vessel. They're certainly not compromised by that. And if the only reason why we're not securing that vessel from Finland is because U.S. law prevents it, even though we could potentially do it for a fraction of the cost and get it in less than half of the time, I would suggest that that's a question for us to consider as a Congress. Why is it that for the sake of hewing to the status quo of what current U.S. law requires, if there is no security implication from doing so, why would we need to limit ourselves to leasing rather than buying with regard to a Finnish-built icebreaker? That's a question I've got for you.
Sir, I think it's in the national interest to preserve our industrial base, shipbuilding base. And I think, history has proven that. That's what won us World War II largely. And so I think to outsource the building of new ships for the use of our military, that would be something we'd have to consider long and hard. And so my starting position is that we need to protect this industrial base, which is declining. Shipbuilding base is declining along the Gulf Coast and other places. And so anyway, that's where I stand on that.
Yeah. And I completely agree that it's a legitimate interest to maintain our industrial base so that we can have access to those things. When our own industrial base can't do things in the same way that others could do, especially with an ally, a friendly Arctic nation, I think that's a good reason for us to ask ourselves the question of whether we ought to revisit some aspects of existing law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.